for coming in. Just to pick up on Deputy Burke's point there, there's this sense of relying on going back to best practice where there are variations between council, as you mentioned, coming together in LGMA and other places, having, Ms O'Connor mentioned there about having one council speak to another about applying best practice. What it highlights actually is an ongoing concern for the committee about a failure of centralised controls over these things. You're talking about 94 million this year, 88 million last year. These are large sums, and that's just one element of local government performance, of delivery on the services that are there. My concern is that there is insufficient, as the committee is noting, insufficient controls centrally about that. What do you, Mr. Doyle, as SecGen, what's your relationship with the council, say, for example, on that? How do you follow up exactly that point where there's different treatment of collecting rent and where you're having to apply? Like, what's your follow-up in relation to the councils on that?
Well, in relation to the look, if it's monies that are due to our programmes, we will follow up those issues with the council. We'll engage with them. We'll find out what the issues are, and we'll try and find ways to suggest improvement. I think one of the ways, as Sinead has suggested, is to try and see what's working well elsewhere, and to try and bring that about, or work with the LGMA in relation to these things. You know, if it's an income stream coming directly back to the council and into the council's own funds, look, we're always interested in seeing best practice applied in those circumstances.
I appreciate that, Mr. Doyle, and I think that's a similar response to what you gave earlier. But it goes back to my concern about, asking them to talk to each other, picking up the phone and sort of hand-holding through it. What happens after that? What's the next step? And this is where the concern about auditing, really comes in. Like, what's next? When we look at the accounts, for example, in relation to the Department of Housing accounts versus local authority accounts, you can see clearly on the Department of Housing side that, for example, the streams of social housing delivery and where that's intended. You can't see that on the local authority side. There's an inconsistent standard between those different things. I mean, for example, one of the things that we've been relying on in relation to social housing delivery, and I have a concern about social housing delivery, is the construction status report, where we're getting very detailed information. Haven't seen that for Q1 this year. It's now the end of June. Where do you think we are on that, for example? Because these are the mechanisms that the department has put in place in order to coordinate delivery from local authorities in the absence of having been able to do anything else to effect consistent local authority delivery.
Well, I mean, in areas of delivery by local government, we monitor that around housing programmes. We engage with them on a continual basis.
But it's more than monitoring. I mean, there was a structure put in place in relation to the construction status report. When is that going to be published for Q1 of this year, for example?
David, do you have an update on that by any chance?
It's just been finalised, Deputy. It'll be published next week.
Next week?
Yeah.
Okay. And do you expect it? How do you expect it to be? Where do you expect the delivery to be? For local authorities and AHBs?
There is a strong pipeline, very significant numbers of projects being commenced over the last few months. So I don't have the exact figure. It was just being finalised yesterday. So
is it up or down on Q4 2021?
I don't have the figure on me. It's just been finalised. I haven't been given the final report, Deputy. So it's been actually compiled. So I expect we'll have it in the coming days, and it'll certainly be published before the end of June.
Mr. Doyle, this is being published next week, and this is this is exactly what I mean. We have a housing crisis here. We're trying to effect delivery. There's a substantial body of money given both to the department and to local authorities to do that. These numbers are extremely important to us. The inconsistency between local authorities and AHBs and delivery from those is one of the reasons that this was centralised. When you were here before, we spoke about changing the 4-stage process into a 1-stage process. That was a departmental oversight, a control to try to effect better delivery or speedier delivery with local authorities. How has that been going? What's the pipeline in respect of that? How many have been delivered through that changed process?
So the process did change. There was a certain sort of slowness in the uptake of it. In fact, in terms of the moving to the single stage for certain projects below the 6 million threshold. David, I think you've got figures for how many have used the single stage process. I think it's in the order of 90.
Yeah, it's 90. 90 separate projects, about 600 units. I suppose, Deputy, just on the process, I suppose the aim here is to balance an efficient approvals process with public value for money. So there is an action in Housing for All for us to review those approval processes and to make them as streamlined as possible. So a working group was set up late last year under John O'Connor, Chair, former Chief Executive of the Housing Agency. And the issues I suppose we're looking at is de-risking potential delays, looking at providing funding for pre-application site assessment by local authorities to sort of speed up that aspect, supporting local authorities to use the single stage where possible. There have been cases, I suppose, where local authorities have, I suppose, enjoyed the comfort of working through the 4-stage and the support that's provided by the department, the technical team. So some local authorities have chosen to go through that 4-stage process because it's a well understood system that's robust, provides a very thorough evaluation of the projects, robust oversight of procurement and design. So some local authorities have chosen to continue using that.
It's interesting because at the time when this was introduced, it was sort of set out, perhaps it was just a perception, as a sort of a panacea for social housing delivery, that this was the block, that the big bad department was, creating too many blocks to local authorities. 600 seems very low in the period that's 600 nationally coming through that 1-stage process pipeline seems very low. Yeah. Is that lower than your expectations?
I think the teams in the department will be working with the local authorities to encourage them to use it, to support them. And I suppose under Housing for All, one of the key issues is to build the capacity of local authorities and their teams. So last year the Minister approved an additional 250 staff for the local authority sector, specifically for social housing delivery teams, and the majority of those are technical resources. So we're building the capacity of local authorities to design and deliver housing schemes. So most of those posts are engineers, architects, technicians. So we're really working to build the capacity of local authorities to develop schemes. We're also enhancing the role of the Housing Agency to support both local authorities and AHBs to develop and deliver schemes. So that capacity building will support local authorities.
We've been doing this for a really long time, and one of the key measures of the department is about affecting delivery. And, as Secretary General, you have the largest housing budget now that there has ever been, in addition to the broad stream of local authority funding. Are you satisfied as SecGen that the departmental controls are sufficient in terms of chasing up local authority delivery? Are you satisfied that the mechanisms are there to do that? I noticed that, forgive me if I'm wrong, that I think that you're not coming, for example, on a quarterly update to the Joint Oireachtas Committee in the way that had been the case before. I don't see the construction status report. I appreciate it'll be out next week, but you can't provide me with any details in relation to it, Mr. Doyle. So are you satisfied that there's sufficient departmental oversight and accountability of local authorities just on this issue alone?
Yeah, I think there's a huge amount of oversight and accountability, and one of the things I'm very anxious to do, Deputy, it's a slightly dangerous thing to say at the PAC, but at one sense we've got to control and be very careful around the use of state money and all of the processes and procedures we have in place. At another level, we have to make sure the projects are delivered and that the houses come through. So we've got to balance that scrutiny with delivery. So it's very important that we work with the local authorities in that respect.
I don't disagree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and so look, what we're seeing is there were about just over 5,000 social houses delivered in each year over the last couple of years. This year our target is 9,000, and we're striving very, very hard to reach that.
That's exactly my point. Those build figures in Q1 of 2022 are very important in relation to that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, look, and as you know, and I think we might see probably more in Q2 and onwards this year. We were hopeful that this year would see a little bit more balancing of the delivery of final housing output over the course of the year. As you know, Deputy, it's long been the case that a lot of the delivery showed up in the last quarter.
Yes, but also from the purchase of turnkeys.
That's been, and there's much less of that now.
Going back to the role, the accounting officer role, and you've mentioned it there yourself, the importance of ensuring value for money. I really do want to take up this point that the committee has identified earlier about the assurances, more assurances for control weaknesses being identified, and putting appropriate controls in place to manage those risks. Can you commit to the committee today that a deeper code of practice for the governance of state bodies will be adopted by the 31 local authorities?
A deeper code of practice, Deputy. Sorry, I'm just.
Or a code of practice that's at least similar to the standards in deeper for all of the other public bodies. There's a gap here.
My understanding is that those standards do apply. The code of practice applies in full with local authorities. So that's my understanding.
I think it may be coming back to the point about the disclosure, the SIC and the disclosures that are required in the code of practice aren't required of the local authorities.
Okay, well, look,
I mean, obviously the standards in terms of protection of assets and compliance with procurement and so on, those obligations are there. I think one of the points, going back to what we were discussing earlier about the SIC, an auditor typically is auditing something that exists. So if the code, the declarations don't exist, it's much more difficult for the auditor to, if you like, to carry out a programme of work that would address whether it's compliant and complete and accurate and so on.
That's exactly it.
Deputy, my colleague has just told me that as part of the work that's going on in terms of the just some of the review work that's going on at the moment, that one of the considerations is actually that requiring that statement to be published.
That's very helpful, Mr. O'Leary.
Okay.
Thank you. So is that a commitment that will be done when that body of review work is done? So the next time we come here, that will be in place?
What's required for us to put it, to make it a requirement? Is it done under regulation, or is it?
No, we're coming up with a new framework of corporate governance for local authorities, which would be based on the deeper model, which will include a statement of internal control requirement on local authorities.
Do you have a timeline for that, please?
During the course of this year, it's a process. It's an ongoing process. So we've involved a number of units within the department, and also the sector are involved in coming up with this framework. So it's an ongoing process, Deputy. Hopefully by the end of this year, it will be in place.
Thank you, Deputy Verona.
Thank you.